Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Cryptids and Monsters video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do a whole new series here based on your suggestions. Thank you so much for your patience on this, everyone. I delayed it just a little bit longer in terms of the days because I was working on the other video, the outside the box one. So I'm glad to be able to do these videos now. Lots of new good suggestions, in fact, and I'll probably end up doing about maybe 10 videos as a nice thank you to everyone. So once again, thank you so much for your continued viewership on this. This particular suggestion, I picked it for two reasons. Number one, it has a very fascinating name. Once I heard this name and I saw it, I immediately started to look up more information on it, and I decided this is going to be great to share with everyone. And then number two is the fact that it ties in to an upcoming film. So there's the very, very fascinating film known as The Meg that is supposed to be released later this year. I think somewhere around in August or so. And that has to do with a great, like a big shark, in this case the megalodon, supposedly making its reappearance in the world. So it looks fantastic. I can't wait to see it. I'm gonna look forward to it. I hope you are too. So in honor of that very great film and the way it's going to come out in just a little bit, I decided to do this one. You're looking at it now. This is a cryptid that apparently haunted the seas there in South Africa a couple of decades back. It's known as the Submarine Shark. Fascinating name, no? I mean, once I heard that, I definitely, again, wanted to see more info on it. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the information, the rich information associated with this very large cryptid, plus the fact that there's a lot of info too to help discredit it, and I'll talk about that more here in a few minutes. So what was this submarine shark? I talk about it in past tense because apparently it was there for a while, but nobody has really seen it thereafter. This was, for all intents and purposes, a super great white shark, a larger than usual great white shark that was found or permeated the waters there in False Bay, South Africa. And it did so for a good number of years, in this case from the 1970s all the way until the early 1990s, so about maybe 2 decades, maybe pushing it to 3 or so. And the reason for this is because great white sharks, they already live a good number of years, so it would make sense for something like this to last a good while, at least in terms of those waters there. As far as its physical characteristics, again, all it is, it was pretty much a larger than usual great white shark. That's why I call it a supersized shark. This was, and as comparison, you'll see it here. This was something that was maybe about a third or more larger than your average great white shark. In fact, those sharks, on the average length, and this is pushing it in terms of its extreme, is about 20 feet long. And this is when it's counting the snout all the way to the very end of its tail, to the very tip, 20 feet long. Here, you had something that was apparently, based on eyewitness accounts, the size of about 30 feet at its maximum, and in some cases, maybe even a tiny bit larger. So clearly, in this case, about a third or more larger than even the largest reported great white sharks. Huge, in other words. So here you have something that if it's approaching you, you would easily be swallowed whole. This would just be a snack, in other words, in its diet. You would not last much when it comes to meeting this creature. To compare it again with the megalodon, even then, that in itself is more of like a puppy. The megalodon is estimated to be at the longest size of about 75 feet or so. In the movie, though, the one that's coming up, I was reading that apparently it's going to be about 100 feet, so they even make it even larger in that case. But going back to the submarine shark here, again, its length definitely made it stood out. The reason why it was found so often during that time period has to do with this. Apparently there in False Bay, South Africa, during that time period, there was a lot of hunting of great white sharks. It was done, it seems like it was done more along the lines of trophy hunting is the phrase that I saw. So not necessarily for food, not necessarily to, like, let's say, keep the waters safe from the danger of these sharks, the so-called danger. Instead, it was more along the lines of catching them and then either selling them or doing something in terms of trophies. So it seems like that's what led to a lot of deaths with these sharks there. But at the same time, it also led to a lot of these so-called encounters with this phenomenon with this very, very large shark. So the way it was that, and people the way reported it was they would be swimming either on a small ship or in some cases using those paddle boats themselves out there for this trophy fishing of these sharks. And as they did so, they would see this very large shadow underneath them, right underneath them, like just straight out of a movie. And when they saw it, that's when they realized this was something that they were dealing with that was much, much larger than anything else. So, and even then, though, the reliability of it is a little bit harder because in those cases where this thing, apparently the submarine shark, came up to them, they would fight it with their rods, they would fight it with their reels, all of it in order to make sure that they could obviously live throughout the encounter. Interestingly enough, though, there were no, I didn't see anything. If someone has, please point it out differently. I did not see anything as far as any claims of people let's say, falling victim to this shark. So despite its size, despite the fact that it was much more massive than the other ones, nothing in terms of it, like, let's say, claiming lives. So if anybody has anything different as far as that and wanted to point it out, please do so in the comments. It'd be great to share. But otherwise, it seems like this one single unicorn of a shark didn't seem to have any deadly encounters with it. And ever since that time period, during the 1970s to early 1990s, it had all these encounters. In fact, you're looking at a book here that pretty much chronicles a good number of this stuff. So there was a lot of people that were out there that were hunting for this shark. It was almost like a self-serving cycle because this trophy hunting caused people to have more encounters with the submarine shark just by the very nature of being out there in the waters more looking for sharks. And then in turn, once the legend grew of this submarine shark, and imagine catching this shark, having it be, in other words, the trophy, the biggest one of all, it caused more people to come out, which led to more encounters with the shark, and vice versa. So it was, again, almost like a cycle that just fed itself, and that's why it led to the phenomenon, the mythology of this shark. But lo and behold, it was just like this, like turning off a light switch. After that time period of the early 1990s, there were no other encounters, at least that people seem to state, to this very day. So interesting to see if anybody can point out to something else happening in the 2000s or beyond, but it seems like during that time period afterward, something might have happened to the shark. Either it went to another area and ended up passing away. Who knows? There's even a theory that it might actually be on its last legs during that time period, because apparently sharks just continue to grow. So eventually the very larger sharks, and I was mentioning earlier, again, about 20 feet or so, those are the ones that are the oldest sharks. They're on their last days. And so if you have something like this being that large, this may have been an abnormal shark that just continued to live longer than usual. But everything dies, and so eventually this shark would have met its own demise, even if it was just old age. But here is at least some info too, as far as it being disputed, as far as it being like, let's say this is truly a supersized shark. Number one is the fact that these people that encountered this shark, again, on the paddle boats or whatever type of device that they were on out there in the seas, apparently there's a different perception when, let's say, you're right above the waters instead of, let's say, a paddle boat, or compared to a much larger boat. You have a much clearer eyesight and a much clearer perspective when you're on the larger boat and you're looking down, because then you can truly see the size that something is. Instead, if you're right above the water level, it's, I guess, the way the refraction works or something along the lines of the water right there, it kind of creates things differently. It skews the size underneath you. So here you have something that's swimming by, all of a sudden it looks much, much larger. So a lot of people are stating that these claims of the shark being 30 feet or more are nothing more than, let's say, a missed perspective or a misperception associated with it. Another thing that ties into it is this: sharks today only grow to a certain size because even though they're the apex, the ultra predator, in the seas. If they grow any larger, they have to eat larger food. But that becomes a problem in of itself because the larger food itself is more rarer. So it's something where along the lines, if you outgrow yourself, then you doom yourself because of the larger need to eat. That's why great white sharks only grow to a certain size. Its maneuverability is being able to chase its prey and do so in a very efficient and deadly manner as well. But otherwise, the larger they are, the more they have to eat. The more they have to eat, the larger the prey. And that becomes a problem as the cycle gets higher and higher. So that's why nature works in a very efficient way. It definitely decides how large something is. It kind of reminded me of a story I remember reading from a while back, like the dinosaurs like the apatosaurus and others, those only grew to a certain length because if they grew even larger, their legs would have to grow even more massive. Like it would have to be wider and wider legs in order to support the larger and larger sizes. Eventually, if you grew a dinosaur too large, the legs underneath it would be so large, they would basically be four gigantic tree trunks all touching one another, and of course that would not work. That's why I remember also seeing in that same report, like that's why a creature like Godzilla would not exist in true life. Hopefully, we all wish it would, but otherwise, the reason why is because if it did so, its legs would have to be so massive in order to support its body, especially with the gravity pushing it down, that it would just not exist. Like it would basically fall in on itself. Such is the case here with the great white sharks. They can only grow so large because of that. If you're wondering, well, there are larger items like other so-called sharks out there, like whale sharks that are well over 40 feet. How are they existing? It's because of this. They're not hunting for larger prey. The article I was reading was stating that they instead obviously feed on much more tinier items. In other words, items that are much more plentiful, so-called filter feedings. In that case, they feed on that tiny, tiny plankton that is everywhere practically throughout the ocean, and it takes very minimal effort to do so. So there you have again nature, in this case, cross-checking each other. A very large animal, but it's made up as, in this case, feeding on smaller animals and with very little efficiency. That's why it can survive and survive so well. So when you have a shark that is much larger than it should be, it shouldn't really exist, or it shouldn't really exist for that much longer time period. It's interesting, no? I mean, when you read that, that kind of makes sense. You would have something like this in terms of a shark just surviving on its side of nature's rules, and in that case, it wouldn't be for too long. And then other theories as well is that in other cases, it's just people overestimating things. It always happens. I've talked about it before in one of my past videos. There was a great test of it where a guy took a cutout of a like in this case of an owl, but an owl that looks like it was placed in a distance. And as people, let's say, were driving by, they were told afterward when they saw suddenly this owl pop up behind, next to them, to describe the size. People were stating much larger sizes than it really was. It's just eyewitness reports and the way that people just sometimes tend to exaggerate things. But who knows, all of that even into consideration, there could still be this creature out there. If it was out there, this submarine shark, maybe it truly was a supersized shark. Maybe it's still out there too this very day. It'd be interesting to see if there ever is another type of encounter like that soon. But what do you guys think? Submarine shark, this supposed very large cryptid-like shark that was out there in False Bay, South Africa. Anybody else that happened to be around that area during that time? That'd be great to hear. Anybody know more info associated with this creature that I might have missed? Please post those comments below too. And anybody going to go see that movie, The Meg, that's going to come out later on in August? Everybody hopes they all are interested in that. Everybody that's going to go there obviously is going to go see it for the kills in this case, because here you have something so massive. I mean, the way it's going to take out people, that's the whole reason people go see movies like this. It'll be great to see it in the theaters. So, all right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.